Today I'm announcing an independent review of New Zealand's electoral laws. New Zealand does have robust electoral laws and our elections are well run. However, the laws need to be looked at to see if they can continue to meet the needs of voters. Much has changed since the 1950s, but most of the electoral law hasn't, and the basic structure of the Act is 60 years old, when voting was based on walking to your local polling station and filling out a piece of paper on election day itself. Although there have been mostly piecemeal tweaks to the laws over the years, there is now an opportunity to take a more comprehensive look at how our elections are run. The aim is to ensure that as many people as possible participate in elections and that we continue to make sure voting is accessible to the next generation of voters, all while being conducted efficiently and securely, because maintaining public confidence in elections is critical for democracy. The independent review will cover such things as enrolling, voting, election advertising, the rules for candidates and political parties, and the roles and functions of the Electoral Commission. The review will also look at voter eligibility, including voter age. Some feel that lowering the voting age could increase voter participation and youth participation specifically. Lowering the voting age would, however, be a major change to our electoral system. Such a change requires a majority in a referendum or a 75% majority in Parliament. So it is crucial that a review provides the opportunity to have a public conversation about the voting age. The review's terms of reference will cover how political parties are financed, including whether or not there might be state funding for candidates and political parties. Again, another issue where a public conversation should lead any changes. The review also provides the opportunity to consider the recommendations from the Electoral Commission's 2012 review of the MMP electoral system. For example, the Electoral Commission recommended changing the party vote threshold for the allocation of list seats from 5 to 4% and removing the one electorate seat threshold for the allocation of list seats. Our thinking is that the review will not look at things like online voting or going back to first past the post, local government electoral law, or constitutional changes like becoming a republic or establishing an upper house. The independent review will consider the length of the parliamentary term. Given the parliamentary term directly affects the ability of voters to select and elect the people that represent them, this is an important issue. We want to explore the public's views on whether New Zealand should have a longer parliamentary term, and there will be a wide range of opinions on the length of the parliamentary term, and we want to hear them. In short, the review provides a chance to look at changes in how elections are run for this generation and the next. The next step is to put together a review panel. The panel will report back with recommendations in late 2023. We aim to have the reform passed before the 2026 general election, but any changes will likely wait until the Electoral Commission and political parties and the public have had plenty of time to prepare. This is work that crosses political party lines, and it is the government's intention to work with other parties in a non-partisan way. I have invited other parliamentary parties to say who they think should be on the panel and what they think the review should cover. The public will have plenty of opportunity to have their say on the review too once the panel is appointed. We're also looking at several targeted improvements that could be made more quickly to support the next election. We're also looking at several targeted changes for the next election, 2023. We're looking at improving the transparency of political donations to make it easier to see where money is coming from. And another area that is being looked at is when people can move between the Māori electoral roll and the general roll. At the moment, Māori voters won't be able to move rolls before the 2023 election. As I said earlier, we do have a world-class electoral system, but we do need to make sure our electoral law is clear and fair, meets the needs of future generations of voters. Sorry, Jason?
What's your thinking around what would happen to some of these meatier terms, such as the 4-year term? Would that be something Parliament decides on, or would you put that to a referendum?
It could possibly be both. I think in preparation for something like that, you might have to pass legislation and that might ride on the outcome of a referendum. I think we're open to those possibilities.
Sorry, Jenny. So though you'd need a certain majority to legislate for a referendum on it?
For some of these changes, we can make a decision to, if Parliament might agree to it in the next term, and then I guess depending on what recommendations come back and what decision the Cabinet makes once we get the recommendations back, some of these issues I think will probably need to go to a referendum, but these are things still to be worked out.
Given the timing of the report back of the review, obviously that referendum is not going to be at the next election, is it?
Correct.
So we're talking
2026.
4-year term from
2029 potentially, depending on what the review comes back with.
So you would have that referendum combined with a general election rather than a...
None of those decisions have been made yet. Those kinds of referendums usually happen at the time of a general election, but that is jumping a lot far forward in the process than we're at now.
In terms of the shorter term provisions that you're looking at, the donations, reform around donations rules, how would you make that more transparent? Because at the moment, the current regime has political consensus.
Look, I think some of the things that we're looking at that the wider review will look at in terms of use of trusts as well. But I think we've done a little bit of consultation, or we'll look to do some more consultation with interested parties, like political parties, before we would take any decisions. We'd hope to do that before the end of the year. It's a piece of policy, an area both there and in the Māori electoral option that we're looking to be able to advance before the next election.
Do you not think the issue is not whether the law is sufficient, but whether or not people are abiding by the law?
It could be both.
Might you be dealing with that loophole that exists around companies that are New Zealand domiciled but foreign owned? Would that be something you could do in these targeted reforms, or would that need to...
No, I think that would be wider. I think when you're looking at some of the more comprehensive issues in amongst the plethora of issues that around electoral financing, I think that would be something that an independent review would probably look at.
And you don't, in the targeted changes for 2023, you don't have anything in there, or haven't flagged anything around these visit requirements for overseas voters. Do you not see that as sort of a relatively pressing concern?
It could be, but as we said to some questions from the Green Party recently, the Justice Select Committee is going to be reporting back on the 2020 review of the 2020 election. We'll look at what they've come back at. As part of the support agreement that we have with the Greens, I spoke to James Shaw. He raised that issue with me directly. If they come back and that is an issue that is raised, there is scope in order for us to look at that, but we're going to wait for the Justice Select Committee to come back first. So I'm just going to come to Luke. Yeah.
When do you hope to have the review panel confirmed by?
By the end of the year. Again, we've given an opportunity for political parties to have some input into that, and other interested stakeholders to have some input into that. We're looking at about 4 to 6 members. We want to make sure we have the kind of expertise and knowledge and diversity that you'd expect us to have there, and would hope to get them appointed before the end of the year.
And who would support that panel? Would the Ministry or...
The Ministry of Justice will do that. I think we've given them the resources to be able to bring in expertise across a 4-year period, enabled to make sure that they can do their job. So again, it's an important piece of work, and again, they will need support in order to do that. Sorry, Jenny had a question.
Sorry, I just had a follow-up on Sam's question. If you've included the overseas voting in this longer-term review, then obviously those changes aren't going to be made for the 2023 election, right?
So if the Justice Select Committee come back and they highlight the issue around the current issue around COVID and the ability to come back home, and we identify that as an issue and there's scope for us to look at it, there is the possibility of looking at that for the next election. We haven't made that decision yet because we're waiting for the Justice Select Committee, but as I said to James Shaw, it could be something that is pursued for the next election if that continues to be an issue for those who would usually come home but don't have the ability to do that at the moment.
I guess maybe the concern at the moment is, if you're looking at it as part of an inquiry into the 2020 election, maybe the problem wasn't as exacerbated then as it is now, so could you look at it separately?
Yes, and that's what I'm saying. If the Justice Select Committee come back, and that is one of the findings, one of the things that we should look at, the Electoral Commission has already highlighted that. We want to wait for the Justice Select Committee. We will then make a decision about some of the issues that we will prioritise alongside Māori electoral option and donations to be able to pass before the next election. We haven't reached that point yet. If we do get to that point, then we'll seriously consider it.
Is real-time donation disclosure on the table?
For the longer work or the shorter piece of work? Absolutely. I think the review panel, I think, will be looking at the donation regime holus bolus. I think there are certainly issues that have occurred as a result of the 2020 election. I think we need to shore up confidence in the public around the donation regime, but in wider terms, yes, they will have the scope to look at that.
Can I also ask, obviously, the select committee played a major role, but this is sort of a bit divorced of any views that you might have. Are you passionate about particular changes that you will reveal in time, or are you going to flat back this and see what gets pumped out of the machine?
Well, I think it's important that we give the public an opportunity to have a large part and say in this. Everyone in this building is extremely interested in some of these issues, like the 4-year term and voting age. But I think the public will want to make sure that they have say on things, and we don't want to get ahead of the public. I think these issues have been floating around for a number of years, either coming up through reviews by select committees or the Electoral Commission, but they aren't necessarily things that people outside of this place think about on a day-to-day basis. And the review panel will be an opportunity for us to have a couple of rounds of consultation, an opportunity for the public to feed in to say what they think, and I think that's really important. People from all stripes in this building will have their own opinions about some of these things, but I think it's important that through the independent review panel, that the public have a strong say in some of these things, and we take the temperature from that. Sorry, Brent.
Previous attempts at changing this to be involved down by partisan politics. So, will you commit that you only make changes with across party support, or would you be prepared to push through changes with the majority you have?
Look, I think we want to continue the way we started. I wrote to party leaders last night saying we want their input around the terms of reference, and we want their input in terms of who might make up the review panel itself. I think it's important that we do have as much cross-partisan support as possible on some of these issues. It's up to each individual party to have a position on some of the issues, and we might not necessarily be able to reach agreement on that. But as was mentioned earlier, if the public come back with strong feelings on issues being progressed or not, there is also 2 rounds of consultation. If changes are made, there'll be a select committee, and if it gets any further than that, then there could possibly be referendums in order for the public to have the final say, and I think that's extremely important. I don't think we want to get bogged down too much in while it's important about what people think here, I think the review panel is out there to test the public about what they think about some of these sort of issues that have been raised for many years. Sorry, Jane.
Getting rid of the 1 seat electoral in Parliament and lowering the threshold, and what consideration would you give to how that would change the look of Parliament and I suppose the parties that could maybe have a chance of getting into Parliament that hadn't before?
Look, I know the Electoral Commission has said that there's merit in that. Again, when I'm announcing an independent review panel, I'm not going to give my opinion on the things that are being looked at, because I don't want to cloud the work that they will undertake.
But coming back to the question, every national wouldn't go with those changes when they were last recommended.
And I think that was in the vacuum of having a decent public conversation about that. I think the important thing about this review panel is that will now happen in a comprehensive way, instead of, I think, what has happened in the last 12 or so years about the piecemeal changes being made.
There was a big discussion and a big debate and review, and the government of the day said, no, not interested. So what, how are you just going to pick what you think, should be done, or are you actually...
No, I think what we'll do is we'll wait for the review panel to come back with what it gets from the public, and what comes back strongly from the public, and what recommendations they will look at. A cabinet will look at that, and I think we'll have conversations with other political parties about that once we get a strong indication of where the public is at. And then I think you have to be very careful about these changes when you get to that point. Again, I'd stress we would want to continue the way we've started in a cross-party fashion.
Is there a risk for you, and especially as a Labour majority government, that you seem to be supporting changes that would benefit you as a party?
Well, that's why I'm not expressing any opinion when asked questions like that. I think it's really important that we've proposed issues that have been gathered up over many years from the likes of Justice Select Committees and the Electoral Commission about how we can make our election system clearer and fairer and more modern, put that out to the public via an independent review panel, and wait for them to come back about what from the public about what they think the priority issues are in amongst that. Jenna?
Why have you started a massive public conversation about our electoral system but taken becoming a republic off the table?
Because this is about the electoral system. It's not about wider constitutional issues. That is a completely and much larger conversation.
Do you think we should become a republic?
I'm giving no opinion on that. I'm here to talk about how we can make sure our electoral system is much clearer and fairer for voters. Again, I think what voters have seen is piecemeal changes over the last 12 or 15 years. There is now an opportunity to take a comprehensive look at the system itself, and we're doing that through rightly through an independent panel who will give advice back in November of 2023 about what the public thinks and what they recommend as well.
And what about your opinion on a 4-year term? Would you like to see a 4-year term?
I'm not expressing an opinion on that. I have in the past. I'm here to say that it's important that we get the opinions of the public.
There's a donation method whereby somebody's commissions art, and that art is bought and the proceeds of which are paid to a political party that's been contentious in the past. Is that something that's in the scope of this review?
It's the scope of the work around donations and party funding is going to be very broad. So I would suggest that that issue will be raised and considered by the review panel.
Do you think the public will
Sorry,
follow?
Seb.
Sorry, can I just go back to Leah's question around the shorter-term work on donations and transparency? Do you have specific policy options in mind now? Because it all seems a bit vague. And what is actually achievable in the short term?
Look, we're working on that. We're not in a position to make any public statements about that, but I think the Prime Minister has made clear that we need to make sure we give the public confidence about the system itself, and also make sure we give clarity to some of the people involved in that system about how it should work and how that transparency should be executed.
Do you think the public will accept, and do you think political parties deserve state funding?
Look, that's something for the public to give their opinion on. I know some parties around here have expressed a very strong opinion on that. And again, I don't want to preempt what the public think. I think that will be one subject that will garner quite a lot of feedback. But again, I don't want to preempt that. It's for the review panel to go out there and speak to the public about how they feel about that and give the feedback regardless of what I think.
It's going to be...
Sorry.
Competing interests for taxes. We've got broken down hospitals. We've got many of the government departments in crisis. Can you really make an argument for state funding of political
And
parties?
I'm sure many in the public may give an opinion on that vein.
Yeah, it's going to be a big piece of work for the independent panel. How much of a budget are you giving them?
I think it's about $6.2 million over 4 years to run a secretariat and also for them to bring in expertise over that period in order to do a couple of rounds of public consultation and come back with a report and recommendations. So we've tried to make sure that they have the requisite resources to do that piece of work.
Yeah, how can the public have confidence in our electoral system and our political parties when so many people from different political parties are up on fraud charges over the way that they're handling donations?
Look, I'm not going to comment as a Minister of Justice about what's happening at the moment, but I think this piece of work is extremely important to make sure that there's trust and integrity from the public in the system. Sorry,
Is your intention to, by the next election, that Māori voters can move to the general vote if they wish to?
Look, it's one of we haven't made a final decision on that. We've still got some decisions to make, but it's certainly an issue that has raised concerns amongst Māori stakeholders that we've already engaged with. That the issue needs to be looked at, and again, it's something that we were hoping to be able to progress before the next election. Sorry, Claire.
Have you seen how many work on how much it would cost if we were to have state-funded political parties?
No, I haven't, and that's why I think it's important to get the public opinion about whether that's a flyer or not. If it's not, then I don't think it will be proceeded. But that is something that we want to gauge public opinion from through the independent review.
Don't the public need to know approximately how much it would cost if we were to just have state-funded political parties to extract political donations?
Look, what I think they will want, as has already been expressed through a question, is to make up their own opinion as to whether the priority lies in other things, or whether that would be best used to support political parties in the lead up to an election. Again, that's for the public to make up their mind, so that we have an independent review panel looking into that. We'll wait to hear back from them before presupposing what we make, any decision we make before the review panel has done its work.
What extra work actually needs to be done on that switching between the Māori role and the electoral role?
We've already done some engagement, targeted engagement with stakeholders, with Māori voters. There is little bit more tuning that we need to do in terms of policy work before we make a final decision. We would hope to do that before the end of the year, because we'd have to get our skates on to change the legislation in order for that to be in place for the next election.
When would you have to have that done by?
Sometime kind of late next year, in order to make sure that we can give the Electoral Commission the time to do that. So we'd have to get our skates on.
What terms of the short-term proposal
Yeah.
will you be seeking cross-party support for that as well?
Yeah, look, certainly in terms of donations, I think we'll have to have conversations with other parties, party leaders, and also their party structures to make sure that the settings that we might have are workable, given the concerns that are there from recent events. So, yes.
What would reviews in terms of reference have to say about sort of high-level principles for our electoral system? I'm thinking like the interplay between stability on the one hand and democratic representation on the other, because they could be at odds when you look at, say, the 5% threshold. Was that something that you would expect the terms of reference are going to set out in terms of what are those principal foundations of the electoral system?
Yes, but I don't think stability is a concern there, Sam. I think, again, I think our electoral system has worked well. I'm not going to call them tweaks, but the recommendations that came from the Electoral Commission off the back of the 2012, are sizable potential changes. So again, I would expect some political parties and other stakeholders to have a strong opinion about some of those.
But I suppose that is the concern about the threshold, and perhaps not with the Electoral Commission. Some talk about scrapping it altogether. You look at countries like Israel, that have, I think, 1%, and there's a plethora of parties and instability in terms of government. So at that sort of level, is that something you expect to set up? And we don't want that level of disruption, I suppose?
Yeah, I think if you look at the electoral law itself, when you start pulling on one thread, usually the others start coming a little bit looser. And I think that's the beauty of the comprehensive nature of the review that we undertake, is that we'll be able to make sure we make judgments, or the review will be able to make judgments of, if you tweak here, then this becomes an issue as well. So I guess because we are taking a holistic approach to this, as opposed to the piecemeal approach that has been taken in the past to amendments to electoral law, we'll be able to, or the review will be able to make recommendations that fit in or are cognizant of other parts of the electoral system as well.
Why are you not looking at online voting?
Because I think making sure that the clearness and the fairness in the system, for the system as it is now, is important. I think there has been calls for many years around online voting, but the ability to do that in a secure way is still questionable. And I think making sure that we shore up the current system, which has served us well, is extremely important.
I guess if that longer term piece of work isn't going to be ready in time for the next election, or possibly even the election after that, why would you not at least start having that conversation?
Because I think because I think that's a considerable amount of work, both in terms of logistics and also in terms of security.
Is Orange Guy safe as the mascot?
That's not a decision for me to make, but he served us well today.
You won't rule out putting the orange guy in the chopping block?
Pardon?
You won't rule out putting the orange guy in the chopping block?
That is a decision that I don't get to make. That's the Electoral Commission's responsibility. But as I say, he served us well. I think we might be coming to the end of questions if we get to that stage. Thank you.